They never announced it. No headlines, no warnings, just silence. Over the past century, dozens of once common American crops quietly vanished. Some were called unsafe, others unprofitable, and a few were destroyed by quiet government orders. From banned berries to forgotten herbs, these plants weren't lost to nature. They were erased. Today, we're uncovering 25 crops the government quietly removed from American gardens, and the shocking reasons why. Once a beloved staple of American homesteads, black currants were quietly erased from gardens in the early 1900s. Scientists discovered they carried white pine blister rust, a fungus that threatened the nation's lumber supply, a cornerstone of America's growing economy. Without much explanation, the federal government ordered farmers to uproot and burn their bushes. Millions of plants were destroyed, wiping out an entire food tradition almost overnight. These berries had been prized for their tart flavor and rich vitamin content used in jams, wines, and syrups. Yet protecting the timber industry took priority over the dinner table. For decades, growing or selling them was a federal offense. By the time a few states finally lifted the restrictions in the 2000s, the damage was irreversible. The black currant had vanished from American soil and from memory. Hemp once represented freedom and self-reliance. Early settlers grew it for rope, sails, and paper. And during World War II, the U.S. even launched a campaign urging farmers to grow hemp for victory. Then came 1937. The Marijuana Tax Act, fueled by misinformation and industrial lobbying, criminalized hemp by grouping it with marijuana. The paper and oil industry saw hemp as a threat. It was too sustainable, too cheap, too useful. Behind closed doors, powerful magnates pushed for its elimination. Government agents seized and burned fields, destroying a crop that had built ships, clothed armies, and fueled rural economies. Within a generation, hemp was gone, its reputation tainted by propaganda. Only recently has it re-emerged under strict regulation, but the shadow of that century-old smear campaign still hangs over one of America's most versatile plants. Sassafras once flavored America's earliest root beers and herbal tonics. Its spicy, earthy aroma defined frontier kitchens and apothecaries alike. But in 1960, the FDA suddenly banned safrole, a natural compound found in sassafras oil, after animal studies linked it to liver damage and cancer. Without warning or public debate, production was halted, and sassafras vanished from stores and gardens. For centuries, Native Americans and settlers used it as a natural remedy for colds, fevers, and arthritis, yet overnight it was labeled a danger. The decision devastated small herbal growers who depended on it. While safrole-free extracts later became legal, the authentic flavor of old-fashioned sassafras tea and root beer disappeared forever. What was once considered a healing tree became a forbidden relic, another piece of American tradition quietly outlawed in the name of progress. For decades, American sugar beet farmers relied on hardy, natural varieties that thrived in harsh climates. But in the early 2000s, genetically modified strains crept in, and within a decade, they had taken over. Government regulators fast-tracked approvals for Monsanto's Roundup-ready sugar beets, while traditional seeds were quietly pulled from circulation. Farmers who resisted were denied contracts with major sugar processors, forcing compliance. By 2012, over 95% of U.S. sugar beets were genetically modified. The transition happened with little public awareness, no hearings, and no clear labeling. It wasn't a ban in the legal sense, it was a quiet replacement. The result? Genetic diversity collapsed, traditional seedlines vanished, and future generations inherited a sugar industry entirely controlled by corporate patent holders. A silent swap sealed behind closed doors forever changed what Americans grow and eat. The white mulberry was once hailed as a miracle crop. Imported from Asia in the 1700s to feed silkworms, it played a key role in America's early textile ambitions. For centuries, it thrived, until the U.S. Department of Agriculture deemed it an ecological threat. The trees spread aggressively, hybridizing with native red mulberries and displacing local ecosystems. Rather than issue public warnings, the government quietly began eradication efforts. Seeds disappeared from catalogs, nurseries stopped selling them, and planting programs were halted without explanation. Today, the white mulberry is labeled invasive in over a dozen states. What was once a cornerstone of early American industry has become an environmental outlaw. Its rise and fall tell a familiar story, one of government overcorrection and forgotten consequences hidden behind the veil of ecological management. Wormwood's story is one of superstition triumphing over science. For centuries, this silvery green herb grew in American gardens as a medicinal tonic and insect repellent. Then in the early 1900s, it became infamous for its role in absinthe, the drink blamed for hallucinations, madness, and moral decay. Although these claims were largely exaggerated, hysteria spread through Europe and the United States. In 1912, the U.S. government outlawed absinthe and discouraged wormwood cultivation entirely. Farmers tore up their crops under pressure, fearing fines and reputational ruin. It wasn't until 2007 that the ban was finally lifted, long after public interest had faded. By then, wormwood's centuries-old medicinal legacy was lost. A harmless herb erased by rumor and fear became a symbol of how easily culture can be rewritten, one regulation at a time. Once revered by ancient civilizations and Native American tribes, amaranth was among the most nutritious crops on Earth, rich in protein, iron, and resilience. But by the 19th century, U.S. agricultural policy had chosen its winners: wheat and corn. Amaranth didn't fit the model of large-scale industrial farming. It grew too independently, too abundantly, too freely. Extension programs dropped it from research lists, and federal subsidies ignored it entirely. Within decades, it faded from American fields, replaced by government-backed monocultures. Ironically, NASA later identified amaranth as one of the best crops for space colonization due to its efficiency and nutrient density. On Earth, though, it was quietly buried, not by law but by neglect. A grain once celebrated for sustaining civilizations was cast aside by a system that valued control over diversity. The quassia tree, native to the Caribbean, once lined American farms as a natural pest deterrent. Its bitter wood contained quassin, a compound toxic to insects but harmless to humans. Farmers steeped its bark in water to make organic sprays that kept crops healthy without chemicals. Then came the 1950s, when synthetic pesticides like DDT took over the market. Backed by powerful chemical companies, government agencies began quietly dropping natural alternatives from approved agricultural lists. Quassia products were no longer registered, and imports were restricted. Within a few years, the tree disappeared from nurseries and agricultural supply chains. Farmers who relied on it were told to modernize. The result: one of nature's safest insecticides was replaced by chemicals that would later be banned for poisoning wildlife, a natural protector erased by profit. The humble gooseberry met the same fate as its cousin, the black currant. Both carried the fungal disease white pine blister rust, a threat to America's booming lumber trade. When the federal ban came down in 1911, few farmers realized it included their gooseberry bushes too. Within months, state agents went door to door ordering their destruction. Families who had grown the fruit for generations watched their gardens uprooted in the name of public good. Even after disease-resistant strains were developed decades later, the damage was done. Gooseberries had disappeared from both farms and recipes. By the time restrictions eased in the late 20th century, few Americans even remembered what they tasted like. tangy, versatile fruit was erased not by nature's will, but by bureaucratic overreach hidden behind a forestry regulation. The Jerusalem artichoke, or sunchoke, was once celebrated as a miracle tuber. High-yielding and nutritious, it thrived in poor soils and cold climates. During World War II, it became a key food source for struggling families, a symbol of resilience. But after the war, America wanted modernity, not memories of hardship. Government marketing boards promoted commercial potatoes as the patriotic choice, while labeling Jerusalem artichokes famine food. Subsidies for potatoes soared, and sunchokes quietly disappeared from seed programs and markets. Farmers who continued growing them were mocked as outdated or unprofitable. Within a generation, the crop had all but vanished from the American diet. Ironically, health experts now praise the sunchoke as a superfood, a natural source of fiber and energy. Yet its reputation, tarnished by propaganda, remains buried beneath the soil of forgotten gardens. Elderberries were once a symbol of homegrown medicine. Every homestead had bushes that yielded rich purple berries used in wines, jams, and immune-boosting syrups. But in the 1950s, as the FDA tightened control over unregulated herbal remedies, elderberries came under scrutiny. Officials didn't ban the fruit outright. Instead, they labeled any medicinal product made from it as an unapproved drug. This move quietly crippled the market, forcing small farmers and herbalists to stop production overnight. Some states even discouraged planting the shrubs, citing toxicity and unripe fruit. Within a generation, elderberries nearly vanished from American gardens. Ironically, the same berries are now being rebranded as superfoods, celebrated for their antioxidants and antiviral benefits. What was once deemed dangerous has become a health trend, proof that even nature's remedies can be erased by regulation, then rediscovered by marketing. For centuries, farmers relied on red clover to restore nitrogen to depleted soils. It was the heart of sustainable farming, a natural fertilizer before chemicals ruled the land. But by the 1950s, synthetic fertilizers promised faster results and higher yields. Backed by major corporations, the government shifted funding and subsidies toward chemical agriculture. Clover rotations were deemed outdated, and extension programs stopped teaching them altogether. As the Green Revolution swept the nation, red clover faded from America's fields. The soil grew dependent on factory-made nitrogen, and generations of farmers forgot that nature already had a solution. Today, red clover survives only in small regenerative farms and wild patches, a living reminder of how convenience replaced balance and how one quiet policy change reshaped the entire ecology of American farming. Before refined sugar took over, sorghum molasses sweetened America's kitchens. Every fall, families gathered to crush the tall green canes and boil the syrup into a golden, smoky nectar. But when industrial sugar producers rose to power, they viewed sorghum as competition. By the mid-20th century, government agencies labeled it inefficient and cut all funding for small-scale syrup production. Sugarcane and beet sugar, both heavily subsidized, replaced it completely. As a result, sorghum fields across the Midwest were plowed under, and the presses that once defined rural life rusted away. The tradition faded quietly, not through public ban, but through corporate pressure and policy manipulation. Today, only a few family farms still produce authentic sorghum syrup, keeping alive a taste that nearly vanished. Sacrificed to profit margins and industrial convenience. For native tribes of the Great Lakes, wild rice, or manumin, ma-nu-min, was more than food. It was sacred. Harvested by canoe, it sustained entire communities for centuries. But when imported white rice gained commercial dominance, the government reclassified wild rice as a weed. In several states, licensing laws and land restrictions made it nearly impossible for native people to harvest their ancestral crop freely. State agencies took control of traditional rice beds, limiting indigenous access while promoting commercial rice farming. The result was devastating. Sacred harvesting grounds declined, and the cultural practice nearly disappeared. Though activists have fought to reclaim these waters, wild rice still faces habitat loss and pollution. What was once a symbol of abundance became a casualty of regulation, erased not by nature but by bureaucracy and disregard for heritage. Epazote, with its pungent aroma, was once a staple of Mexican and southwestern cooking. Settlers grew it in backyard gardens for its unique flavor and digestive benefits when cooking beans. But in the 1970s, the FDA quietly began discouraging its sale after studies found that its compound, ascaridole, could be toxic in high doses. Rather than issue an outright ban was not necessary. Regulators simply labeled it unsafe for commerce, and nurseries stopped carrying it. Within years, it disappeared from American seed catalogs and grocery stores. Ironically, millions in Latin America still use it daily, without issue, as both a spice and a remedy. What vanished from the U.S. wasn't just a plant, but a cultural connection. Epazote's quiet removal shows how bureaucracy can erase tradition under the guise of safety, while the rest of the world continues as before. Long before carrots and parsnips dominated kitchens, Americans grew skirret, a sweet white root vegetable with a taste somewhere between sugar and earth. It was common in colonial gardens and praised by early settlers for thriving in cold climates. But when 20th century industrial farming demanded uniformity, skirret became a casualty of modernization. Its uneven roots and delicate texture didn't suit mechanical harvesters or supermarket shelves. Without funding or inclusion in federal seed programs, it faded from seed catalogs and culinary memory alike. By the 1950s, it was nearly extinct in the U.S. What replaced it wasn't better flavor or nutrition, just convenience. Skirret, a plant once loved for its sweetness and resilience, was quietly forgotten, left to linger only in old gardening journals and heirloom seed archives. In hard times, chicory root was America's backup plan. When war or shortages cut off coffee imports, people roasted and ground chicory to create a rich, caffeine-free brew. It became especially popular during the Civil War and Great Depression. But once trade normalized, imported coffee regained its throne, and chicory was branded poor man's coffee. Government policies favored foreign imports through low tariffs, while domestic chicory faced new regulations and high production costs. Farmers abandoned the crop, unable to compete. By the 1950s, only small Louisiana producers still roasted chicory, preserving it as a cultural relic rather than a necessity. Today, most Americans have never tasted it, though it remains iconic in New Orleans cafes. A humble root that once symbolized resilience was erased from the national palate, replaced by dependency on foreign beans. The 18th one is castor bean. The castor bean plant once stood tall in American gardens and factories alike. Its oil-lubricated machinery soothed wounds and powered wartime industries. But after World War II, a shift in public perception and industrial priorities turned it into a pariah. The discovery that ricin, a deadly toxin, occurs naturally in its seeds led to widespread fear. Instead of improving safety protocols for oil extraction, the government shut down domestic cultivation altogether. Synthetic lubricants born from petroleum replaced castor oil almost overnight. The castor bean's long history as both a healing and industrial crop vanished beneath Cold War paranoia. Today, it survives mostly as an ornamental plant, its legacy overshadowed by its association with poison. A once essential American resource was quietly buried by fear and the chemical industry's rise to dominance. In the early 20th century, American tobacco farms grew hundreds of heirloom strains, each with unique aroma, flavor, and curing properties. But that diversity threatened the growing monopoly of major tobacco corporations. In 1938, the Agricultural Adjustment Act allowed the government to regulate which varieties could be legally grown and sold. The goal was to streamline production and stabilize prices, but the result was devastating. Dozens of unique strains, including the prized Chiquita variety, were outlawed or deregistered. Farmers were forced to burn their old seeds under threat of fines. Within a decade, centuries of regional cultivation vanished, replaced by standardized, approved crops. These laws not only erased agricultural heritage but ensured corporate control over the nation's tobacco supply, a quiet consolidation that forever changed the genetic landscape of American farming. Barberry was once cherished for its colorful red berries and usefulness as a hedge plant. But its fate was sealed when scientists discovered it could host the fungus responsible for wheat stem rust, a disease that threatened one of America's most valuable crops. In the 1920s, the USDA ordered a massive eradication campaign. Agents went door to door across the Midwest demanding homeowners cut down and burn their shrubs. Millions of plants were destroyed, and barberry seeds were outlawed in several states. By the 1960s, the once common bush had nearly vanished. Though some ornamental hybrids remain legal, true barberry is still prohibited in major agricultural zones. What began as a beloved garden shrub ended as a symbol of fear, a sacrifice to protect wheat that cost America one of its most vibrant native sites. The 21st one is sweet vernal grass. Sweet vernal grass once perfumed meadows and pastures with a soft vanilla scent. Farmers loved it for its early spring growth and use in hay, while perfumers prized it for its coumarin aroma. But as allergies and respiratory illnesses became a public concern in the mid-1900s, the grass was scapegoated. Agricultural departments labeled it a cause of hay fever, discouraging its growth and removing it from seed catalogs. It wasn't officially banned, but supply chains dried up until it all but disappeared. Synthetic perfumes replaced its natural fragrance, and the meadows that once carried its sweet smell fell silent. Today, few people even recognize the name. A plant once cherished for its scent and charm was quietly erased, not through regulation, but through collective forgetfulness. Fueled by industrial convenience. For centuries, rue was more than an herb. It was a symbol of protection and healing. Colonists grew it near their doors to ward off disease and misfortune. It appeared in old American pharmacopoeias as a cure for headaches, cramps, and anxiety. But its strong scent and slight toxicity made it a target for early FDA scrutiny. By the 1940s, it was labeled unsafe for consumption, and seed distributors quietly dropped it from catalogs. Public gardens removed it to comply with safety guidelines, and within a generation, it faded from cultural memory. Once a sacred part of herbal medicine and folklore, rue now survives mostly in historical gardens. A plant that once guarded homes and hearts became another casualty of overcaution, erased in silence, remembered only by those who still believe in its ancient power. The 23rd one is sorrel. Sorrel's sharp, lemony flavor once gave brightness to soups, stews, and sauces in early American kitchens. Homesteaders grew it alongside parsley and thyme, valuing its easy growth and vitamin-rich leaves. But when industrial agriculture took over in the 1950s, sorrel didn't make the cut. It wasn't profitable, uniform, or durable enough for shipping. Government crop guides stopped listing it, and seed programs focused on high-yield produce instead. Within decades, sorrel became a forgotten relic of home gardening, preserved only by immigrant communities and small heirloom farmers. Today, it's praised by chefs as a gourmet rediscovery, the same humble leaf once dismissed as unmarketable. Its disappearance wasn't caused by danger or disease, but by indifference. Sorrel's quiet removal reminds us how flavor itself can vanish when profit replaces passion in the garden. Wild mustard once grew freely across American farms, its yellow blooms painting fields gold in the spring. Both foraged and cultivated, it provided spicy greens and seeds for homemade condiments. But in the 1960s, as the pesticide industry exploded, wild mustard became public enemy number one in ad campaigns for herbicides. Companies portrayed it as a menace, something to be exterminated with chemicals. The government backed the narrative, labeling it a nuisance weed. Farmers who once harvested it began spraying it instead. Within a generation, the plant disappeared from gardens and menus alike. Its vanishing wasn't accidental, it was marketing genius. A nutritious, sustainable crop was destroyed so chemicals could be sold. Wild mustard, once a symbol of spring and self-sufficiency, became collateral damage in America's war on weeds. Borage, with its sky-blue flowers and cucumber-like taste, once thrived in American gardens. It attracted bees, flavored salads, and soothed fevers in herbal medicine. But in the 1980s, studies suggested its seeds contained small amounts of compounds that could harm the liver if consumed in large quantities. The FDA responded with quiet caution notices. Not an official ban, but enough to scare suppliers. Nurseries stopped stocking it and seed companies quietly deleted it from their catalogs. Within a few years, it was nearly impossible to find. Ironically, European countries continued to grow and eat it safely. What vanished from America was not just a plant, but a connection to centuries of herbal wisdom. Borage, once called the herb of courage, was silenced by fear and forgotten by a generation that no longer questioned why. From currants to hemp, from sassafras to borage, these weren't just plants. They were pieces of culture, memory, and independence. Each one erased not by war or disaster, but by policy, profit, or fear. So the next time you walk through a supermarket and notice how few old crops remain, remember it. Wild mustard once grew freely across American farms, its yellow blooms painting fields gold in the spring. Both foraged and cultivated, it provided spicy greens and seeds for homemade condiments. But in the 1960s, as the pesticide industry exploded, wild mustard became public enemy number one in ad campaigns for herbicides. Companies portrayed it as a menace, something to be exterminated with chemicals. The government backed the narrative, labeling it a nuisance weed. Farmers who once harvested it began spraying it instead. Within a generation, the plant disappeared from gardens and menus alike. Its vanishing wasn't accidental, it was marketing genius. A nutritious, sustainable crop was destroyed so chemicals could be sold. Wild mustard, once a symbol of spring and self-sufficiency, became collateral damage in America's war on weeds. Borage, with its sky-blue flowers and cucumber-like taste, once thrived in American gardens. It attracted bees, flavored salads, and soothed fevers in herbal medicine. But in the 1980s, studies suggested its seeds contained small amounts of compounds that could harm the liver if consumed in large quantities. The FDA responded with quiet caution notices, not an official ban, but enough to scare suppliers. Nurseries stopped stocking it and seed companies quietly deleted it from their catalogs. Within a few years, it was nearly impossible to find. Ironically, European countries continued to grow and eat it safely. What vanished from America was not just a plant, but a connection to centuries of herbal wisdom. Borage, once called the herb of courage, was silenced by fear and forgotten by a generation that no longer questioned why. From currants to hemp, from sassafras to borage, these weren't just plants.